They came on a Tuesday, no announcement, no atmospheric burn trail, no countdown. The orbital platforms registered a gravitational anomaly at ZO 347 unit AirC, and then the sky above the Midwest turned the color of a bruise, not purple. Exactly, more like the space between purple and black where language gives up trying. And 3 objects the size of aircraft carriers hung there, silent, blotting out the early stars. By morning, every government on Earth had scrambled fighters. By noon, every government on Earth had stood them down. The aliens didn't fire back, they didn't maneuver. They just waited, those 3 dark masses, patient the way geological formations are patient, while the world below them held its breath and tried to remember what prayers sounded like. The transmission came at 1420 Q3C, broadcast simultaneously on every frequency humanity used to talk to itself. It wasn't in any language at first. It was math, prime sequences, geometric progressions, the kind of thing SETI had been praying for since 1960. Then it resolved, after 47 minutes of decryption work done by every computer network on the planet working in unison, into something that translated roughly as a declaration. We are the Vorath. We have observed your kind for 11 of your centuries. You are a violent, fractious, inefficient species occupying a resource-abundant world you have not yet learned to manage. The standard protocol in such cases is absorption. Your biology becomes ours. Your world becomes ours. Resistance as you understand it is not possible. However, we have also observed something in your kind that merits a single concession. You play games, not merely games of chance or territory as many species do, but games of extraordinary physical complexity requiring the integration of spatial reasoning, kinesthetic mastery, collective strategy, and what your neurologists call flow states. We find these games instructive. We have played them ourselves among ourselves for longer than your civilization has existed. Therefore, a challenge. You will select 11 of your finest players of the game you call basketball. We will select 11 of ours. You will play 1 game on a neutral court of our construction. Standard rules of the game as you practice it, with modifications we will specify. The outcome will be binding. If you win, we leave. If we win, you surrender your world peacefully. You have 72 hours to respond. That was it. That was the whole thing. The call came to Marcus Reeves at 11:47 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, while he was sitting in a parking garage in Oakland, eating a gas station burrito, and trying to remember what his therapist had said about emotional regulation. His phone lit up with a number he didn't recognize. The area code was 202. He let it ring 4 times, ate another bite of burrito, and picked up. "This is General Patricia Osi," the voice said, "acting chair of the Emergency Coordination Council. Am I speaking with Marcus Reeves?" "Depends on what Marcus Reeves did." A pause. "I need you to understand that this call is being made with the full authority of the United Nations Security Council and represents the most important human decision made in the last 5,000 years. Marcus chewed slowly. Outside the garage, he could see the edge of that sky, the bruise-colored horizon where one of the 3 ships hung over the Pacific like a storm that had forgotten how to move. "I heard about the game," he said. "We need you to coach it." He stared at the burrito. "Why me?" "Because you coached the Detroit Pistons to 3 consecutive championships using a system no one understood until after you won with it. Because you have an 81% win rate in games where you were considered the underdog. Because you know basketball the way surgeons know anatomy. Not just the mechanics, but the psychology, the improvisation, the human element that wins games nobody thinks can be won. I got fired last spring, we know, for headbutting a referee. We know that too. Are you in or not?" He looked at the sky again. One of those ships was big enough to park Kansas City inside. "Send me a car," he said, "and get me a chicken sandwich." The burrito was terrible. The facility they took him to was underground, 3 levels beneath Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Dayton, Ohio. It smelled of concrete and recycled air, and the particular human anxiety that accumulates in enclosed spaces when the stakes are cosmological. They had already recruited 9 players when Marcus arrived. He read the files in the elevator going down. Darius Bell, shooting guard, Memphis, 26 years old, former college phenom, 3 years with the Grizzlies, averaged 32 points a game last season, famously could read a defense the way readers read sentences, effortlessly, line by line, before anyone else had gotten to the first word. There was a note in his file, reads ahead of the play, sees 2 moves before they happen. Elena Vasquez, point guard, Spain, the first woman selected to this team, which Marcus noted with something that wasn't quite satisfaction but was adjacent to it. She had competed in the FIBA Women's World Championship 4 times, won it twice, and her assist-to-turnover ratio was the highest ever recorded at international level. Another note: orchestrates the game the way conductors orchestrate music. Team elevates around her. James Okafor, center, Nigeria, 7 feet 1 inch, 31 years old. Defensive Player of the Year, 3 times running, renowned for a technique coaches called shot erasure. The ability to appear to let a shooter commit to a move and then, at the last possible instant, materialize in exactly the right position to make the shot impossible without touching the shooter. His file note read, "Not fast. Inevitable." Marcus read the rest in the elevator. A shooter from Lithuania named Paulius Grybaitis, who could hit a three-pointer in the dark. He'd reportedly once proved it on a bet. A Brazilian power forward named Sofia Andrade, who had played injured through 2 consecutive playoff series and simply refused when asked about it to identify which injury she'd been playing through. A South Korean guard named Park Yun-jin, whose defensive footwork was described in one scouting report as geometrically impossible. A Cameroonian forward named Emmanuel Chamba, who had averaged a triple-double in the Olympics and called it unremarkable. A Turkish shooting guard named Elif Yilmaz, who had broken the women's 3-point shooting record 3 consecutive years. A 7-foot Russian center named Dmitry Volkov, who once, in a post-game interview, said that basketball was the only honest form of mathematics. And an American point guard named Theo Watkins, 23 years old, raised in Harlem, who had been playing in a rec league in Brooklyn last week because no NBA team had drafted him, despite his high school coach's unambiguous claim she'd sent the letter unsolicited to every team in the league. That Theo Watkins was the most naturally gifted player she had ever seen, and that the league would regret passing on him until long after she was dead. Marcus read Theo Watkins's file twice. He got out of the elevator and met General Osi, who was a compact woman in her 50s, with the kind of posture that comes from having been right too many times in rooms full of people who outranked her. "What are the Voreth's modifications to the rules?" Marcus asked before she could brief him. She led him into a room with a screen on one wall and pulled up a diagram. The court dimensions are the same. The scoring rules are the same. They've stipulated one alteration. The game will be played under what they're calling kinetic enhancement conditions. The court's gravity will be increased by 18%. Their species is adapted to approximately 1.3 standard Earth gravity. They're offering to match our conditions as a concession. So they're slower than they'd be on their home turf. Considerably. But their base physical parameters, even under gravity suppression, are, she paused. "I need you to understand what we're dealing with." She pulled up footage. It was taken by a reconnaissance drone that had managed to get close to the underside of the central ship before the Voreth had not destroyed it exactly, but gently, precisely redirected it away without any apparent effort. In the brief seconds before the redirect, the drone had caught what appeared to be the Voreth in an interior space, moving. They were 8 feet tall at minimum. Bipedal, but only approximately. Their joint articulation was wrong, too many possible angles, giving their movement a quality that made Marcus's visual cortex work harder than it wanted to. Their hands had too many fingers, long and multi-segmented, and in the footage they were passing something between themselves that looked like a basketball, except it moved with spin rates and angles that suggested the passers had a relationship with physics that was, at minimum, a graduate level. Disagreement with human intuition. "How many of their fingers can grip a ball?" Marcus asked. "We believe 8, independently." Marcus watched the footage for another 30 seconds. "Get me a whiteboard," he said, "and coffee. And I need to meet Theo Watkins tonight." Theo Watkins had been in the facility for 6 hours when Marcus found him. He was in the practice area, alone in the dark, shooting free throws by the light of his phone propped against the base of the backboard. He was making every single one. Marcus stood in the doorway for almost 2 minutes, watching. The kid had the kind of shot that looked effortless the way complex machinery looks. Effortless once someone has spent enough years calibrating it. The ball came off his hand clean, no wobble, perfect rotation. So consistent that after the first dozen makes Marcus found himself watching the arc instead of the release, because the release had become background. He turned on the lights. Theo caught the ball off the backboard, turned, clocked Marcus, and didn't say anything for a moment. "You're the coach," Theo said. "Yeah, they showed me your film, the Detroit series." "And?" Theo looked at him with an expression Marcus couldn't immediately classify. It wasn't reverence. It wasn't skepticism. It was the particular focus of a person who has decided that the world contains exactly one piece of information worth extracting from this moment, and is in the process of extracting it. In Game 7 against Milwaukee, Theo said, you called a timeout with 11 seconds left, down 3. Your guys thought you were going to draw up a 3-point play. Instead, you drew up a foul draw, got to the line, hit 2, made it a 1-possession game, then called timeout again with 2 seconds and used the reset you'd set up in the third quarter. The play they never saw coming because you'd installed it as a dummy during the second half specifically, so they wouldn't catalog it as a real threat. Marcus said nothing. You knew in the third quarter, Theo said. You knew how it would end and you were already setting it up. I knew how I wanted it to end, Marcus said. There's a difference. Theo thought about that. Is there? Marcus almost smiled. Get some sleep, he said. We start at 5. Training began the next morning in the facility's full-size court, under fluorescent lights that buzzed slightly and smelled of industrial cleaning solution, which Marcus decided was appropriate. This was not going to be a glamorous preparation. He laid it out plainly for all 11 of them. First session, standing at the center circle while they sat in folding chairs brought from a conference room, because the facility didn't have bleachers. I've watched the Vorith footage. I've run every number I can run. Here's what we're dealing with. They're stronger, they're taller. Their reach advantage is approximately 14 inches at every position. They have finger joint flexibility that lets them control the ball in ways we can't replicate. And they've presumably been playing this game, or something like it, longer than some of our civilizations have existed. No one said anything. Here's what they don't have. He picked up the marker he'd been holding. They don't have what Elena does when she finds the gap in a defense and the ball arrives at her hands, already knowing where it's going. He looked at her. She didn't react. They don't have what Darius does when he reads a rotation and the whole geometry of the offensive end reorganizes around where the shot is going to come from 4 seconds from now. He looked at Darius. Same stillness. They don't have James blocking a shot in a way that tells the shooter, deep in whatever part of the brain handles pattern recognition, that this particular move will not work, not today, not against him. He paused. They have size. They have reach. They may have reflexes we can't match one-on-one. What they don't have, what I've seen in no recording of alien intelligence ever made, is flow, state. The thing that happens when 11 human beings stop being 11 individuals and become something that has no name in any language except the language of the game itself. He looked at all of them. That's what we're building. Not a team, that thing. We have 6 days. Elif Yilmaz, in the second row, raised her hand. What are the specific gravity conditions? 18% above standard. You'll feel heavy. Your vertical will drop. Your explosiveness off the catch will be compromised. You'll get used to it. And theirs? Okafor asked from the back. His voice was very low, very calm, the way bedrock is calm, suppressed to match. They're operating below their natural gravity threshold, which means their timing will be off. Not much, they're adapting their whole lives to variable gravity probably, but off. That's something, said Sofia Andrade. It's one thing, Marcus said. We'll need more than one thing. He ran them hard. Not the standard hard of professional preseason. That was a known quantity, a calibrated suffering with established endpoints. He ran them through scenarios he'd been designing since 3 in the morning, building on what he knew about the Vorith movement footage and what he was rapidly learning about his 11 players in conditions they'd never encountered before. The elevated gravity affected them differently. Paulius Gribatus, whose shot was pure mechanics refined over 2 decades, barely noticed. The muscle memory adapted within hours, recalibrating at depths below conscious processing. Sofia Andrade, who played through pain as a philosophical position, simply treated the extra weight as another piece of terrain and kept working. James Okafor got heavier and slower and simply redirected that into a kind of immovability that became its own tactical asset. Theo Watkins, on the other hand, struggled. Marcus watched him through the first day with the same expression he gave every diagnostic problem. Total attention. No judgment, just data collection. Theo's game was built on quickness. Not just foot speed, but reaction speed. The ability to process and initiate faster than defenders could anticipate. The gravity hit him where he lived. His drives lost their first step. His pull-up jumper, which in normal conditions had the flat trajectory and snap of a perfectly thrown knife, dropped short twice in a row, and then started compensating wrong, the mechanics shifting in ways that would compound errors if he let them. Marcus didn't say anything to Theo that first day. Let him work it out. watched how he worked it out. What he saw was that Theo, when he couldn't go through a problem, went around it. When the drives stopped working at the same pace, he started working the angles differently, not trying to recover his burst, but instead using the gravity as an explanation for defenders too, letting them see a slower Theo and not yet understand that the slower version had found other things to do with those extra fractions of a second. By the end of day 1, Theo was operating at 60% of his normal speed and finding in that 60% plays that his full-speed version would never have discovered because it would never have had to look. Marcus wrote that down. He wrote down a lot. Day 2, he ran positional defense drills, because the Vorith's reach advantage would turn standard defensive positioning into a disadvantage. Standard coverage assumed a certain ratio between wingspan and the gap you needed to close. Against the Vorith, every calculus was wrong. He needed new angles, new help rotations. He needed Okafor to think of his role not as blocking shots, but as defining zones of impossibility that forced their shooters into the only windows the team allowed. Day 3, he ran offense. Pick-and-roll variations. Off-ball screens built around Elena's passing geometry. Transition sets that used the gravity differently. The Vorith would also be slower, which meant transition was actually more available, but only if the team could read the moment of conversion before it happened, which meant everything upstream of Elena had to be calibrated to give her the information she needed 3 seconds before she needed it. "You're trying to make us think like one person," Park Hyunjin observed on day 3. He said it with interest, not complaint. "I'm trying to make you think like something that isn't a person," Marcus said. "A person thinks in sequence. I need you to think in parallel. 11 of you running separate threads of the same computation." "That's not how humans work," Park said. "It's how the best human teams work, for intervals, for stretches. We can't sustain it the way a distributed intelligence might, but we can hit it at the right moments, hold it long enough to score, and then recover. And you know when those moments will be?" Marcus looked at him. "That's my job." On day 4, General Osi came down to observe. She stood at the edge of the court for 2 hours, not speaking, watching. At the end of the session, she pulled Marcus aside. "The Security Council wants a confidence assessment," she said. "What does that mean?" "Probability of winning." He looked at her. 50-50, she waited. "That's not a hedge," he said. "That's honest. I've got 11 of the best players humanity has produced in the history of the game. I'm working with a system built on incomplete data about an opponent I've never seen play under these conditions. I know things about what they can do, and I'm guessing at what they can't. 50-50 is the real number, maybe less." Osi absorbed that. "Is there anything you need that you don't have?" He thought about it. "More footage," he said. "Whatever the reconnaissance drones can get of the Vorith practicing. I need to watch them move, and I need 2 more days. The challenge window gives us 1 more day. Then I need 1 more day." She nodded and left. He went back to the court, where the players were shooting around, and stood at half court and watched them. Elena and Theo had been talking quietly near the 3-point line for the last 10 minutes. Elena drawing something invisible in the air with one finger while Theo watched. Darius and Paulius were running a 2-man shooting drill. Darius feeding passes from bad angles to see how quickly Paulius could reset his feet. Okafor stood under the basket doing something that looked like meditation, but was probably defensive visualization. He'd mentioned it on day 1, a technique he'd developed, mentally rehearsing rotations until they lived below deliberate thought. Sophia and Ilif were working the corner 3 action Marcus had drawn up that morning, a play that required an exact timing beat between them that had taken half a day to sync. They ran it again and again. He watched them find the beat and lose it, and find it again. And there was something in the watching that felt almost sacred, which surprised him, because Marcus Reeves was not a man who usually permitted the sacred into his professional vocabulary. Emmanuel Chamba sat alone at one end of the court, studying a tablet that he'd been given with the Vorith footage on it. He'd been watching it since it arrived. Marcus walked over. "Anything?" Marcus asked. Chamba looked up slowly. "They pass ahead of where the receiver is going, not where they are." Marcus sat down next to him. "Show me." Chamba rewound the footage and pointed. "Here and here. You see it? The pass leaves before the cut. But it's not anticipation the way we do anticipations. It's not reading the body, language, and projecting. It's as if they know, predetermined, like the play exists already and they're just executing it." Marcus stared at the footage. "They run plays that are too complex to improvise, very complex, very structured. They're good because everything is pre-choreographed to a level we couldn't sustain in a real game. Too many variables. Except, Marcus said slowly, if you take away a variable, if you remove uncertainty from one part of the system, the choreography works. Chamba looked at him. If you can predict where the defense is going to be, Marcus said, you can run a fence that's choreographed to the millisecond. But their choreography assumes a predictable defense. He stood up. That's it. That's the thing. He was moving toward the whiteboard on the side of the court. Get everybody over here. The fifth and final day of preparation, Marcus ran the team through the plan 3 times start to finish. Each run-through under game speed, under the gravity, with him on the sideline calling out Vorth position adjustments based on the movement patterns Tachamba had identified. The discovery was this. The Vorth operated almost certainly with some form of shared cognition, a low-level collective processing that let them run a fence the way code runs, without the delay of individual decision-making. It was why their passing was ahead of the cut. They weren't reading each other. They were consulting each other faster than human neural processing could manage, at a level that looked like intuition but was actually computation, which meant that against a truly unpredictable defense, their offense would fracture. They had no improvisational fallback or a limited one. The choreography assumed stable inputs, and if you introduce chaos, the whole system would have to reconsider from the beginning. That reconsideration would take time. Not much, but enough. The second discovery was about their defense. They hedged hard on every ball screen. It was the natural response to superior size and reach. Why concede ground when you can simply be where the ball is going? But it created a specific vulnerability in the weak side corner that Elena had identified on day 3, and that Marcus had spent 2 days building a play around. It required 3 off-ball movements happening simultaneously, timed to a count that had no margin for error, leading to a corner 3 from either Paulius or Elif, depending on how the Voreth rotated. It would work exactly twice before they adjusted. He needed to use those 2 attempts on the right possessions. One more thing, Marcus said at the end of the final session. He looked at all of them. Their faces were tired and present in the way that faces get when exhaustion has burned away everything that isn't. Attention. The game will be strange. The court is their construction. We don't know all of what that means. The crowd, if there is one, will not look like anything you've seen. The referees are Voreth, and I have no confidence in their objectivity, which is why every play I've drawn up has clean lines, no ambiguity, no hope of bailout calls. You win possession, you maintain possession, you execute, you score. Nothing that can be taken from you on a judgment. He paused. They think this is a demonstration, he said. They think we're going to show them something about human physical capability, and they'll be interested in it the way a naturalist is interested in an unusual bird, and then they'll absorb us. They don't think we can win. They built in the challenge so they could say they gave us a chance. He looked at each of them in turn. I want you to understand that. They're already writing the end of the story. Where the part in the middle they didn't bother to read carefully enough. Nobody said anything. Okafor cracked his knuckles once. Elena was completely still. Theo was looking at the floor. Let's go make them read it, Marcus said. The transport went up at 0600. It wasn't a rocket or a shuttle. The Voreth had sent a vehicle, a flat-bottomed disc that settled in the parking area outside the facility with a sound like the world taking a deep breath. It was twice the size of a city bus, and the interior smelled of something that was either metallic or floral depending on where you stood, and the walls were the color of deep water. They loaded the gear in silence, the 11 players and Marcus and General Osi, who had insisted on accompanying them, and 2 equipment technicians named Rodriguez and Park, who had been designated as official support staff and were both, Marcus knew, secretly carrying detailed reports of everything they could observe for the government's xenobiological analysis team. The flight took 11 minutes. They went up through clouds and then through the upper atmosphere and then through the dark, and there were no windows exactly, but the walls became translucent enough to see the earth receding below them, and Marcus stood next to Theo Watkins and watched his youngest player watch his planet get small. You okay? Marcus said. Yeah, Theo said then. My mom used to take me to Riverside Park when I was little. She'd point at the sky and tell me something good was up there. I thought she meant God. What do you think she meant now? Theo looked at him. There was something in his eyes that wasn't fear and wasn't bravado, something more useful than either. I think she meant this, whatever this is. He paused. She would have liked to see it. Marcus nodded. He didn't say anything else because there was nothing else to say that wouldn't dilute the moment. The arena was inside the central ship. They walked through a passage that curved gently upward. Marcus understood after a few seconds that they were walking along the inside of a curved surface, gravity adjusted precisely to make it feel horizontal. And then the passage opened and he stopped. The court was perfect. That was the first thing. Hardwood, real hardwood, or something that looked and felt exactly like it, with the lines painted clean and the arcs drawn true. The dimensions were exact to the regulation inch, which meant either extraordinary research or the possibility that the Vorith had been watching human basketball games at the kind of resolution that implied they'd had cameras inside the arenas. Above the court, curved inward around it, was a gallery. The Vorith were in it. Thousands of them. Marcus couldn't estimate the number because the gallery was three-dimensional in a way that confused his sense of scale. A honeycomb of positions radiating outward from the court. They were silent, all of them, watching. They were exactly as large as the footage suggested. Under the arena's light, which was even and warm and came from no visible source, the Vorith looked less like a threat than like architecture. They didn't crowd forward. They didn't gesture or make sounds. They watched with the complete stillness of entities for whom watching was not a passive act but a form of analysis. The Vorith team was already on the court. Marcus had expected this, had told his players to expect it. A psychological tactic. The home team already present. The visitors made to feel like they were arriving late to their own execution. He watched his 11 walk onto the court, and he watched them look at the Vorith, and he watched what happened in their faces. What happened was calculation, not terror, not paralysis. Each of them was doing what he had trained them to do, reading the opponent, cataloging what was in front of them, filing it. Darius Bell glanced at the Vorith for exactly 4 seconds, then turned away and started stretching. Elena walked to the half-court line and stood there, looking at the full geometry of the space, running her internalized model of the game forward across the dimensions. Okafor looked at the Vorith center, who had at least 3 inches on him, and nodded slowly, once, to himself. Theo Watkins stared at the alien point guard for a full 10 seconds, then turned to Marcus. "Their lead guy," Theo said quietly. "He's favoring his left." Marcus looked. The Vorith's starting guard was moving differently from the others. Barely. A compression of normal that you'd miss if you weren't looking for it. Injury or adaptation. Like maybe their left side is the dominant side, and the gravity suppression is affecting the coordination differently on dominant versus non-dominant. He paused. "I could be wrong." "You're not wrong," Marcus said. He'd seen the same thing and hadn't let himself trust it until someone else said it. First, remember it. The referees were 2 Vorith in darker garments who communicated the start of the game through a tonal sound that translated as something between a whistle and a chord. Tip-off, Okafor jumped. The Vorith center had a reach advantage that made the jump irrelevant. Marcus had known this, had planned for it. Let them have the tip. He'd drawn up a defense designed to concede the first possession and gather information. The Vorith brought it up. Their point guard, the one Theo had noted, initiated the play with a pass that was already in transit before the cutter had begun moving, exactly as Chamba had described the choreography unfolding. Marcus watched it. His players rotated. The first possession lasted 19 seconds and ended in an alien bucket. A simple drop pass into the post that Okafor had positioned well to contest, but couldn't actually block. The height differential and the reach were both real, and the shot was released from a position 3 inches above where Okafor's best extension reached. 1-0. Elena brought it up. She walked the ball across half-court, called the play with one-hand signal that most of the team probably didn't even register consciously, and ran the motion. Marcus watched. The Vorith defense hedged hard on the screen, exactly as he'd predicted, and for a fraction of a second the weak side corner opened, but only a fraction, not enough, not yet, and Elena saw it and pulled it back and went into secondary action instead. Swung it to Darius, who drove and drew the contact and got the bucket off the glass. 1-1. He could feel from the sideline the Vorith readjusting their defensive model. It wouldn't take them long. It never took good defenses long to readjust. But readjustment was itself a break in the choreography, a moment of recalculation, and Marcus was building toward the moment when he'd forced that recalculation at the worst possible time for them. The first quarter was a war fought at the level of inches. Every Vorith advantage was real. The size, the reach, the coordination, and his players were managing it the way he'd told them to manage it, not trying to overcome it directly but working around the edges, scoring where the geometry allowed, defending by conceding what couldn't be contested and protecting what could. At the end of the first quarter, the score was 19-15, Vorth. Marcus gathered them. He looked at their faces. They were working, fully present, moving through the game with the focus he'd been building all week. He looked for cracks. Any sign of the weight getting to them, the strangeness of the place, the audience of thousands of alien observers watching in absolute silence. He didn't find any. What he found was 11 people who had already made peace with where they were and were concerned only with what came next. Good, he said. Stay in it. Their choreography is holding, but I want it disrupted. Park, on the next screen and roll, take the wrong side intentionally. Not wrong enough to give up a basket. Wrong enough to corrupt their read of your positioning. They'll recalibrate from that moment, which means there's a gap in their coverage while they update. Darius, be ready in the gap. Park nodded. Alina, time the weak side action for the second or third possession of the second quarter. When Okafor sets the second screen, I want a lift in the left corner. Don't force it. Read when they're in transition and their right side rotation is one step late. That's when. Elena said nothing, but Marcus had learned her silences were affirmations. Theo. He waited until Theo looked up. Their point guard is protecting that left side. He's shading right on every drive. You've been respecting it. Stop respecting it. He'll cut me off. He'll try to cut you off and he'll be half a beat slow and you'll get to the line, or you'll kick it to Darius in the pull-up spot. Trust your read. Theo held his eyes for a moment. Then he nodded once, the small precise nod of someone who has already decided to do something and is just making it official. Second quarter. Park ran the wrong side on the second play, and Marcus watched the Vorth defense process it. Watched the infinitesimal pause in their coordination as their collective model updated, the choreography stuttering like a video file when the buffer runs out. And in that pause, Darius Bell materialized in an open lane and put up a floater that kissed the glass and dropped. The Vorth did not react with visible frustration. They simply updated and continued. But they'd updated to a model that assumed Park might take the wrong side, which meant they were allocating defensive resources to cover a variable they hadn't planned for, which meant somewhere else in their system a coverage was now thinner. Theo saw it. He pushed the pace on the next possession, walking the alien point guard into a ball screen, reading the hedge, and when the hedge came, he drove left. The alien guard tried to cut across, but the suppressed gravity made the lateral step half a beat off, and Theo got past and drew the foul and got to the line and hit both. 19-20. Humans up by 1. The Vorth crowd didn't make a sound. Marcus thought about that, in the background of everything else he was doing. The complete silence of those thousands of observers. Either they couldn't express the kind of vocal reaction a human crowd would, or they weren't surprised, or they were waiting for something. He decided it didn't matter and put it away. The weak side action came on the third possession of the quarter. Elena walked the offense through its motions, Okafor setting the second screen on the left side, and Marcus watched Elena's head. She was reading the whole floor, processing, and then she saw it. The Vorth right side rotation was one step slow coming out of transition, their center slightly out of position because of the repositioning Park's earlier misdirection had forced them into, and Elif Yilmaz was in the left corner and completely open. The ball came out of Elena's hands and crossed the floor in a clean arc and hit Elif in stride, and Elif rose up with the mechanics of something that had been perfected over 15 years of work in gymnasiums across 3 continents, and the ball left her fingertips with the flat trajectory and perfect backspin that she could produce in the dark, on a bet, under gravity she'd never felt before, and it went in. The score was 21-19. Elena found Marcus's eyes across the court, and in her expression was something entirely unreadable and entirely sufficient. They went into halftime down 28-32. The Vorth had answered the corner 3 run with a 7-2 sequence that Marcus had half anticipated. They recalibrated fast, and their offensive efficiency was brutally high when their choreography wasn't disrupted. And his defense had broken down on 2 possessions in a row when the choreography ran perfectly, uninterrupted, producing a play that covered angles his help rotations couldn't reach. He didn't talk for the first 2 minutes of the halftime. Let them breathe. Let the reality of the score settle into something other than panic. We're down 4, he said. In a game where 4 points can happen in 90 seconds. This is not a problem. This is a position. He looked at each face. Pollius Gribatus had a slight cut above his right eye from an incidental collision. He hadn't mentioned it, wasn't mentioning it now, was sitting with his elbows on his knees and his eyes steady. Sophia Andrade was running her thumb over the tape on her left wrist with the absent focus of someone going through a physical ritual that has become synonymous with readiness. Emmanuel Chamba had his eyes closed, which Marcus had learned meant he was in there somewhere running tactical simulations. Okafor was eating a protein bar. Their second-half offense will shift, Marcus said. They know we figured out the corner action, they've covered it. They'll go to their postgame more, center into the paint, because their size advantage in there is the most reliable scoring mechanism they have, and they can see I can't close it with Okafor alone. He looked at Okafor. We go to the zone for stretches. 15-second burst zone, just long enough to disrupt one possession's choreography, then back to man. The rotation is here. He drew it quickly on the travel whiteboard he'd brought, the lines going up and the angles shifting. The point is to present them with an unfamiliar geometry every time they think they have us read. And offense? Darius said. Alina runs the show. He looked at her. Whatever you're seeing, run it. I've been calling sets. Second half I call 1 and 2. The other one is yours. She blinked. For the first time since he'd met her, her expression shifted from its steady professional base into something less armored. It passed quickly. One thing, he said to all of them. One thing I need you to carry into this half. They have a phrase, the Vorith, that the linguists translated for me. It's in their challenge declaration at the end, in a section they didn't include in the main text, but was recoverable. It translates as something like, the game is already played. We are only its enactment. They believe outcomes are deterministic. They believe this game was already won before it started. He paused. That is not a human understanding of a basketball game. A human basketball game is a living thing. It breathes. It changes. The outcome isn't written until the final second and then only barely. He looked at all of them. Make them feel that. Make them feel what it is to play a game whose outcome is not already known. That's the advantage we have that doesn't show up in any scouting report. Third quarter opened with a burst. Elena pushed pace. Marcus had told her the show was hers and she ran it like she'd been waiting for. Permission she didn't actually need. The offense flowing into shapes he'd drawn, and shapes he hadn't drawn, and shapes that existed in the space. Between the two, her decisions arriving in the offense like current in water, the team moving around her read before she'd articulated it. The Vorith were good. They were consistently, relentlessly, almost tediously good, their defense adjusted, their offense executed. Their coordination maintained its eerie collective precision under conditions that would have frayed any human team. They were not rattled. They did not make errors of emotion or ego. They went down 7 with 3 minutes left in the third and continued to play at exactly the same tempo and efficiency as they'd played down 2. But the burst had happened. The team had felt it. Marcus could see it in how they were moving. Something in the connective tissue of the game had changed, a quality of shared momentum that was not measurable but was absolutely real. The thing he'd been trying to build all week and couldn't name and couldn't teach directly, only cultivate the conditions for. They went into the fourth up 39-35. The fourth quarter was the longest 10 minutes of Marcus Reeves's professional life. The Vorith came out of the break playing harder. Not harder in the emotional sense. They didn't seem to have emotional gear changes the way human teams did. But harder in the sense that their efficiency had been recalibrated upward, their execution compressed tighter, their error tolerance reduced to something approaching 0. They went on a 6-0 run in the first 2 minutes that turned the 4-point lead into a 2-point deficit. And Marcus watched it happen with the still attention of someone watching a wildfire from a calculated distance. He called timeout at the 5-minute mark, down 41-43. In the huddle, nobody panicked. Nobody needed him to tell them it was recoverable. They'd been in the game too long to treat a 2-point deficit as anything other than information. Theo, he said. Theo looked up. You've been reading their point guard all game. Tell me what he does when they're up in the fourth. Theo answered without hesitation. He positions himself differently. He's not in the same spot. He floats wider on the weak side, which I think is their version of ball security, keeping the play away from the center of the court. But it takes him out of the passing lane on the right side. Is there a window? 30 seconds ago I saw it. It'll come again. Marcus looked at him for a moment, not assessing, deciding. He'd been making decisions about Theo Watkins for 5 days and everyone had come back correct. Not because Marcus was always right, but because Theo had been right and Marcus had been right to trust him. "Run it," Marcus said. "When you see it, run it. Don't wait for me." They went back out. The next 3 minutes were what Marcus would later, when asked to describe them in deposition for the UN's official record of the event, call the most precise thing he had ever seen human beings do together. Elena handled, Park set a screen, Darius ran the curl, Okafor sealed, Elif spotted up. The offense moved in exact relationship to Elena's red, and her red was operating at a level where the game was telling her things before they happened, and she was simply translating, and the team was simply enacting. And for 3 minutes the offense didn't misfire once. 43-43 with 90 seconds left. Then 45-43 after Darius hit the pull-up from the pocket. The Vorith came down and ran their offense, and for the first time Marcus watched it stutter. Not from his team's defensive pressure, but from something internal, some interference in the collective processing. He didn't know why. He would never know why, exactly, though he had theories. Maybe the accumulated unpredictability of the human game had finally overloaded their predictive model. Maybe 5 days of adapting to disrupted choreography had used computational resources they needed for real-time execution. Maybe the thing that couldn't be measured, the quality of shared momentum, the breathing game, had introduced a variable their system couldn't account for, whatever the reason. The stutter. The Vorith post player received the pass and found the angle closed, looked for the outlet. The outlet was covered, the possession rotated and rotated again, and Sofia Andrade, small and tireless and operating entirely below the level of pain, deflected the pass and Theo Watkins scooped it up in full stride. He saw the lane, 67 feet of open court, 30 seconds on the clock, 2 points up, the alien point guard between him and the basket, the gravity pressing down at 118 standard. He went. Not the way he'd gone at the beginning of the week, that first step explosion that the gravity had blunted. He went differently, lower, controlled, reading the angle of the alien guard's positioning, the slight favor of the right side that had been there all game, and he went left where the guard was slightly slow to shift, and the alien reached with those 2 many-fingered hands, and Theo slipped under them and rose up in the lane, and the shot left his hand an angle calculated on the fly, from the read he'd been accumulating for 5 days about gravity and distance and the specific geometry of alien defense. It went in 47-43, 28 seconds left. The Vorith called something, not a timeout, their own equivalent, a tonal sound that brought the play to halt. Marcus stood at the sideline and watched their team confer. They were, for the first time, doing something that looked like what a human team does under pressure, processing unexpected information, running a new model. The silence in the gallery above was absolute, and then, after a moment, it changed, not to sound, not to cheering, but to a quality of attention that had shifted, something that registered on the body even if it had no name. Marcus thought, they're watching now. They weren't before, not really. The Vorith resumed. They pushed the pace, their coordination reasserting with something that felt almost like urgency. Marcus had the half-second thought that this was the first time he'd seen them in a hurry, the first time the game had forced them out of the tempo they'd set. They drove. Okafor was there. The collision was legal, technically, but Okafor's positioning meant the shot was rushed, the angle wrong, and the ball carameled hard off the backboard, and Elena was in position before it fell. She'd been positioned before it fell. 3 seconds before it fell, she had read the trajectory off the backboard and started moving, and the ball arrived in her hands at the exact moment her feet found their spot, and she looked up at 12 seconds left, and 47-43, and took her dribbles toward the corner and let the clock run. The Vorith fouled at 4 seconds. She went to the line. No crowd noise, no roar or silence in the human sense, just that quality of attention, those thousands of alien observers leaning in at a cellular level. Elena Vasquez at the free throw line on the most important possession in human history, and she bounced the ball exactly 3 times the way she had bounced it at every free throw line since she was 11 years old in a gymnasium in Seville, and she shot the first one and it went through clean, and she bounced it 3 more times, and she shot the second one and it went through clean, and the buzzer sounded and the score was 49-43, and that was all. Nobody moved for a moment. Not the players, not the Vorith on the court, not the thousands in the gallery. The game had ended and the world had to work out what that meant, and that working out took time. Then Marcus walked onto the court and put his arms around Theo Watkins and didn't say anything, because there wasn't a word in any language for what had just happened that wasn't also an understatement. General Osei, who had been standing at the baseline for the entire game, and who had not made a sound for 40 minutes, pressed her hand over her mouth and looked at the ceiling of the arena, which was curved and deep and lit with no visible source, and her eyes were wet. The Vorth players stood still, not agitated, not aggressive, still, processing. Their collective cognition running a model of an outcome they had apparently not run before. The transmission from the gallery came through the same translator device they'd been given at the start, a small unit clipped to Marcus's lapel, provided by the Vorth. It rendered the gallery's collective communication as text on a small screen. It read, "The outcome was not predetermined." Then, after a pause, "This is a thing we had not encountered before in this form." Then, after a longer pause, "We will honor the agreement." And that was all. The debrief afterward was long and loud and full of people with credentials asking questions Marcus didn't always have answers to. He gave what he could. He described the preparation, the strategic choices, the in-game adjustments. He described what he'd seen in the players and what he'd trusted them to find on their own. He described the moment in the fourth quarter when something had shifted in the collective processing of the Vorth offense, and what he thought it might mean. He was asked many times in many different framings, what was the decisive factor? He gave different answers at different times, depending on who was asking. To the military analysts, he talked about the tactical discovery of their choreographic vulnerability. To the sports scientists, he talked about the gravity adaptation and how different bodies had found different ways through the same problem. To the philosophers and the linguists, who seemed most uncertain about what to do with the event, he talked about the moment on the bus going up and what Theo had said about his mother pointing at the sky. But in the report he filed himself, the personal account he was asked to produce for the archive, he wrote something different. He wrote, "I have coached basketball for 22 years. I have seen a great many things in that time that I could not adequately explain. The human capacity to play together. Not to coordinate, not to optimize, but to play in the full sense of that word, with all the risk and joy and improvisation it implies. I have never been able to explain that. I don't think it's explainable. I think it is the thing that the Vorth observed in us for 11 centuries and could not classify. I think it was the thing they found instructive. And I think they were right to find it instructive. And I think we won because they assumed that finding it instructive meant they understood it. They didn't. Neither do I, fully. But I know how to work with it." He paused in the writing there and sat back and thought about Theo Watkins going left on a galaxy-breaking drive under suppressed alien gravity, reading an advantage that he'd been accumulating in quiet for 5 days, making his mother's unspecified hope come true at the best possible moment. He kept writing. "What I know is that a basketball game is not a mathematical problem. It is a living conversation between 11 people that changes with every breath, and every read and every relationship of trust built across a week of preparation. The Vorth play was already played before they played it. Ours was not. Ours was happening continuously, in the space between intention and execution, and the human willingness to improvise in that space and find something real there. That is what won. Not skill alone, not strategy alone, though both mattered. That quality. That specifically human quality of playing a game that is genuinely alive until the final second. I cannot prove this. I can only tell you that I've seen it before, in smaller rooms with smaller stakes, and I always know it when it happens. And it happened here, under the worst and strangest possible conditions, because that is what human beings do when the game demands it. It may be the most important thing about us. It may be why we're still here. The ships left on a Thursday. They rose out of the sky before dawn, the 3 dark masses lifting without ceremony, without sound. And by the time most of the world was awake enough to watch, they were already beyond the upper atmosphere, shrinking to points, and then to nothing. Marcus Reeves was in a parking garage in Oakland when it happened. Different parking garage from the one where all this had started, but parking garages in Oakland at 4 in the morning have a certain continuity of character. He was eating a sandwich, better than the burrito, considerably, and watching the sky go clear. His phone lit up. Theo Watkins. He picked up. "You watching?" Theo said. "Yeah." A long pause on the line. The sky outside was enormous and clear, and the stars, which had not been properly visible for the last 8 days because of what had been blocking them, were back in their old positions, exactly where they'd always been, Theo said. Yeah, I called my mom. Good, she cried. Yeah, Marcus said. She would. Another pause. She said she always knew, Theo said. That something good was up there. Marcus looked at the sky for a long time without saying anything. The sandwich was good. The night was cold and clear. The stars were all still there. She was right, he said. He hung up, finished the sandwich, started the car. He had a team to rebuild.